Andy, my dude, have you heard of the magical website builder known as Squarespace?
Ugh, not another Squarespace ad. I feel like every podcast is sponsored by them.
Hey, don't knock it till you try it. Yes, okay, it is overhyped, but actually it lives up to the hype. Squarespace is like a website fairy godmother. With a click of a button, your site transforms into a beautiful masterpiece.
A website fairy godmother? That sounds interesting. What makes it so magical?
Well, for starters, those slick templates make anyone look like a professional web designer. Pick one, customize the colors and fonts to match your brand, and voila. Plus, the drag-and-drop fluid engine is so easy, your grandma could build a site on Squarespace.
Well, she did knit me a lovely scarf last Christmas. Maybe website design is next.
Exactly. And when you're ready to sell your Nana's handmade scarves online, Squarespace has built-in e-commerce. Add a store with one click. Get flexible payment options. Then watch those sales roll in. And when she wants to teach others her steezy scarf skills, Squarespace's new courses feature is just the ticket. Nana can set up her curriculum and enrollments and payments in a snap and become the next e-knitting influencer.
Oh, wow, you really sold me with the grandma angle. Sign me up for that free trial.
Just go to thenextreel.com/Squarespace and transform your site into a beautiful Squarespace masterpiece.
Well, thanks, Pete. Even though it's overhyped, Squarespace actually sounds perfect for Nana's site's needs. Appreciate the warning on the ads, though. I'll brace myself next time I listen to a podcast.
Anytime. Let me know if you need any help getting that site up and running. Andy, can you believe we've almost hit 700 episodes of The Next Reel?
I know, it's crazy. And with all the other episodes in our family of podcasts, we are well over 1,200 episodes of movie conversation. It's really pretty amazing that we've gotten to have these in-depth movie chats every week for over a decade now.
And we couldn't have done it without our loyal community of film fans. Their support over the years has meant so much.
For sure. That reminds me, we should give the merch store a shout out. Buying shirts from thenextreel.com/merch is a great way listeners can continue to support the show. Plus, they get to sport our great designs.
Absolutely. I think sometimes folks forget we have a variety of shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more available. In fact, a great place to start is with a shirt sporting the Next Reel's logo.
We also have that classic Fast Times Spicoli Surf School tee, or the weirdly popular Rusty's European Tour shirt.
The one from National Lampoon's European Vacation. Why is that so popular?
Search me, but we have sold a ridiculous number of those. I guess there are a lot of Rustys taking trips to Europe?
We're always adding new designs based on movies we've covered, like our brand new design for a streetcar named Desire, featuring a streetcar named Desire. So if you want to rep your love of TNR and films, head to thenextreel.com/merch.
Every purchase helps us continue to have these weekly in-depth conversations. So visit thenextreel.com/merch today.
And as always, thanks for listening and being a part of the Next Reel community. We've got lots more great movie chats coming your way. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson.
Welcome to The Next Reel. When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Teloter to Foter is over. One does not simply walk into Mordor.
Legend tells of a ring created by an ancient evil that gave its wearer the power to enslave the world. Believed lost for centuries, it has now been found.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
This is the One Ring, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron. Sauron needs only this ring to cover all the lands of a second darkness. He's seeking it. Seeking it all. His thought is bent on it.
No one knows it's here, do they? Do they, Gandalf?
The weapon of the enemy is a gift. Let us use it against him.
You cannot wield it. None of us can.
The ring must be destroyed.
It was made in the fires of Mount Doom. Only there can it be unmade.
I know what I must do, but I'm afraid to do it.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
There is no other way. There's something down there.
Are you frightened?
Yes.
Not nearly frightened enough.
The line that started 1,000 memes, Andy.
I was going to say, like, that has become such a meme. And it's like, it's not just that and seeing Sean Bean as he says that as the meme, but it's just like, just saying one does not simply blank into blank. Like, it's become such a thing that it's just like, what a strange thing to have like become a meme. I guess that's why memes work, because it's like,
That's
well,
why
that was
memes work.
strange, but yeah.
The thing about that one in particular is like, it just took one person, just that one person to hear him say that and think one does not simply other stuff. And that is just a real gift to be able to hunt that and realize that Sean Bean saying that thing applies to everything in the world ever. So it's brilliant. So that is the big meme. We are doing The Lord of the Rings. That's what we're embarking on. That's our big series right now. So we're going to do all 3 of the movies.
And we should say we're looking at the extended editions of the 3 films.
I really struggled with that this time because, since the extended editions entered my library, I've watched the movie a couple of times, several times with different combinations of folks over the years since they came out. And I no longer remember the theatrical versions of these movies. And so there are things in there I'm trying to place, like, was this in? I mean, it's 4 hours long almost, but I can't quite place what they possibly would have cut for the theatrical version anymore. That's gone from my head. So I hope you remember everything.
Well, I mean, do you want to start there?
Yeah. Why don't we? Why don't we start there? That seems like a good way to begin.
So to your point, first off, the length of the movie has now expanded with this to 238 minutes, almost 4 hours, as you said. And now what's funny about that is it feels like the last half hour is just credits. Like, of all the things
that's actually a good point, right?
Of all the things that they've added in the extended editions, one of the things that really adds to that time is that they added like this at the very end of the credits, this Lord of the Rings fan club. Like, you could like go to this website and you could get onto this list. And I can't remember exactly the thing. I feel like I tried doing it. I can't remember if I did or if I ended up in any of these credits or not. But you could get yourself listed in it because you were a fan of the movie. Howard Shore had to kind of redo his end credit score to allow for an extra it's purely just 10 plus minutes of just credits of people in this fan club. Like, it's crazy how much that is. We'll just start there because that's definitely something in all 3 of these that they've added. And, just also as a note, the extended editions of these did play theatrically before Return of the King was released. They played in the few weeks leading up to Return of the King's release. They played the extended edition of Fellowship for a weekend, and then the second weekend they did the extended edition of Two Towers, and then the Return of the King came out that following week. And I don't know if that's been released, Return of the King's extended edition, into theaters until it's coming out. Like, by the time this is out, it probably is already playing, because that was one of those things that, a lot, it's their, I think it's an anniversary.
Some anniversary,
yeah. 20 anniversary. So it's cool to see these things in theaters when you can. So as far as the extended editions, though, I don't think that we want to necessarily go through all of them because there are so many.
Yeah.
But they've added a few new scenes, and then they've extended scenes as well. So at the very beginning, the whole concerning hobbits bit, where you have Bilbo as he's writing his memoirs, this whole thing is much more extensive. You're getting a lot more of kind of what the hobbits are up to there.
Mm-hmm.
You get a little bit more of the Green Dragon. You get when Frodo and Sam are walking through the forest. They're kind of like, I think Frodo, or they're cooking or something, and Frodo hears the elves, and they go and see the elves are heading to the west. And so after they've left the Prancing Pony with Strider, there's a scene where they're staying in these marshes, and like all the mosquitoes are attacking them, and Strider brings them in the middle of the night. He brings a deer and like some food for them. So those are kind of some of the new scenes there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more stuff at the whole opening as far as like scenes that have been extended, as far as additional stuff at the birthday party and like all of that sort of thing. Additional stuff in the when you have the scene with Aragorn and Boromir talking about the sword, the Isildur's sword that had been broken. And so a lot of those sorts of things have been extended. And then you also have a scene when you have Aragorn going to this memorial stone for his mother, Gilraine, and Elrond comes up to him to talk about the two of them and the whole thing with how he's the king and they can reforge the sword, but he's the only one who can wield it, blah, 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 that whole scene.
Yes, which I think that's great. Like, so far, all of the culture stuff and the history stuff that's added in here is, I think, additive to the movie. Like, there's nothing in here that I feel like, I understand you cut for time on a movie like this, but I do think the extended edition is better, especially leading up to the foreshadowing of the sword, Isildur's sword, being reforged.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like those sorts of things definitely help. And I think there's also more like when the Fellowship is departing Rivendell and stuff. So, and again, lots of extended stuff going all the way through like Balin's tomb and the Mirror of Galadriel and just all the way. I mean, the whole thing, there's so much that has been added all through. And some of it's very short. Some of it's, much longer. But yeah, it's interesting that you do get to this place where you start watching the extended version so long that you start losing track of what had been added, because again, some of it is just so short, or some of it just all kind of feels so a part of the movie that you wonder why it was cut. And I think a lot of it is just, a whole theatrical thing about like, well, can we really have a movie running this long? And that's the whole thing.
Yeah, I think so.
So, I mean, is there anything that you feel it sounds like you probably aren't remembering specifics too much, but were there any of those that as I was rattling, you're like, well, I guess I don't know if I really needed that one?
No, I feel like the stuff that I love and didn't remember as being excised from the theatrical cut concerning hobbits, the entire bit at the beginning that was added around hobbits, I think is fantastic. There's a whole bit on the passing of the elves, and I love that cultural like tie into elves moving on the boat. Like, I think that's really great. So it's honestly, it's like the slower moments in the movie that I think improve pacing of the film, right? All this stuff that I like so much, it's not the big fighty slashy fake things throwing at fake things. It's the slower conversational moments. It's the conversation at Gilraine's memorial. It's it's those pieces that I think are really nice. What is your memory? I should have gone back and just watched the end of the theatrical cut, especially around Boromir. How does Boromir's departure, his entire fight at the end, how does that differ from the theatrical cut? Do you have a clear memory of that?
I mean, first off, it's just worth noting that in the book, like they kind of took the opening of Two Towers, which is the attack of the orcs and the death of Boromir. That all happens at the start of Two Towers. At the end of The Fellowship of the Ring, the book, it goes through Boromir trying to take the ring from Frodo, and kind of it's the breaking of the Fellowship, but then the attack of the orcs starts off to the Two Towers. So that's obviously just a difference within the books.
Well, and I do think that's actually kind of an interesting note too, just as a side point on the books. Like when Tolkien first wrote the books, he had envisioned them as a single publication of 6 what he called books or major sections, and I think it was the publisher that came back and said, we've got to split these up. So when it was written, it was written as a single huge piece, and the publisher made, I think, what looking at how it was turned into the 3 volumes of the book and the 3 volumes of the movies, those splits are a little bit arbitrary.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it makes sense to have kind of the big climactic fight tied into the splitting of the Fellowship at the end of this film, right?
No doubt. Absolutely.
Like that makes a lot of sense. But it's funny because I haven't seen the original versions since the extended edition was released.
Yes. So. I know, that's crazy. That to me, that but I know that I came away from my sense memory of the extended edition ending is that I like it much, much more because it gives me more affinity to Boromir after his initial sort of character failing when he has his sequence with Frodo asking for the ring. So that difference, like the difference of how he is handled as a character, is more significant to me in the extended edition. That was a great choice. And I think, if anything, it was a miss having less Boromir in the original. But I'd have to go back and watch that again to be completely sure.
Yeah, right.
That's where I stand.
Let's talk a little bit about kind of the introduction of this level of fantasy in the world of film, because I think it was a hard-earned place to kind of come to fantasy like this level of a high fantasy story that they felt an audience would enjoy. I mean, we talked a little bit in our pre-show chat about kind of our history with the books and the animated films and the audio dramas and all that sort of stuff. But it's interesting. It was always kind of there. But like when you come to fantasy, like Ridley Scott did Legend, but it felt like the release that they had to release before even the director's cut feels a little silly. Like there's a lot of like this goofy comedy. Like they were trying to figure out, well, if it's going to be fantasy, it's either got to be like a lot of nearly naked people running around like Conan, like those sorts of films, or it's got to be kind of for kids. And like you look at what they did with Legend, and sure, like the creation of Tim Curry's character is incredibly frightening, but then you have these like goofy like elf characters that are and dwarf characters that are super, super silly, and it just kind of brings the whole thing down because it's just like this dumb level of comedy that just feels like it's written for, people under 10. And, and I know there were films like Dragonheart where they were trying to do something, but even that felt a little, I don't know how well it ended up feeling like we're going to do serious fantasy now. I mean, can you think of many serious fantasy films that were coming out that weren't necessarily like scantily clad people or for kids?
Is that crazy? I can't, but it's probably just because you asked the question.
I know.
I think you're right. And it goes back to something that you and I have talked about a lot that I actually think weirdly applies to this movie too specifically, which is, in our conversation, we've talked about the Marvel movies and how Iron Man was the example of you have to earn your wizards by grounding them and by grounding the universe and world building. And what's weird about this is it's almost like in the first 15 minutes, we actually have a wizard, a bona fide wizard. But I do think this movie does a fine job of earning the wizard, right? Because it's so grounded in culture of these peoples, and and the special effects early on in the movie, like they are legit believable. Like we talk, I know we've talked over the years using this movie as an example of the power of practical effects using forced perspective to actually create hobbits, and they did a lot more than just forced perspective to create hobbits. I mean, there were, giant suits, and there was all sorts of compositing. But largely, when you see that wagon with the seats separated that Gandalf shows up in so that it makes Frodo small next to him, and using that just sort of the optics of the camera to make a hobbit, I was completely bought in to the universe, right? I was completely bought into the universe. Like, they could have done just about anything because they grounded me in Hobbiton so well. And they made it fit in this bigger universe the second Gandalf rides in. So I think when I look at other movies that sort of play in this space, weirdly over the last 23 years, 25 years, they kind of stand on the shoulders of this movie. I don't remember any other high fantasy film that stands out to me in a way that feels quite so human.
Well, yeah, and I guess they are there. Like, I could name things like The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, but again, those feel, and we've talked about Labyrinth on the show before, there's definitely like this Jim Henson version of fantasy in those, as opposed to kind of this real world fantasy. Not to counter that like there's anything wrong with those. I think it's just a different type. And also, I'm not sure that those were as successful at the box office. And I think that was the thing. Because, Terry Gilliam did Time Bandits and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and that was a notorious
Lest we forget
flop.
Willow, right?
Willow, which, again, also kind of went into kind of some really goofy humor in that film.
Goofy.
But, I mean, again, they were trying to do stuff, they were trying to be a little more serious with that one. But again, I would say probably more for a younger audience. Neverending Story, The Princess Bride, I think that one may be the most successful. But again, that just feels like you could almost dismiss any of the fantasy elements and just look at that as a love story, like a period love story, because it's not like dragons are flying around in that film or anything, and stuff like Krull and Dragon Slayer. So they're there.
Which I loved, by the way. As a kid, I absolutely loved those movies.
Yeah, the effects are insane. Yeah. And even going to something that definitely is more adult, like John Borman's Excalibur,
mm-hmm.
I think that there are times where people are trying to do this type of fantasy. I just don't know if any of them were capturing the box office. And I think, I think people were a little concerned that, well, okay, it's either got to be cutesy, like Lady Hawk, it can be kind of a cutesy period thing, or we need it to be something that is definitely going to draw a kid audience, because I'm just not sure otherwise if it's going to really tap into the zeitgeist. And that's the thing that I think probably made it really hard for Peter Jackson to kind of get this thing off the ground. And I mean, talk about a challenge. He was pitching this for a number of years, trying to prove that they could do this, and proving that they could do it with Weta, as far as kind of using these bigatures that they were doing, and working with Alan Lee and John Howe, who were definitely people that were already in that space, but trying to prove to the studio that it's possible. But the best way to make sure that it's going to work as effectively as possible is to let us shoot the whole thing all back to back to back, which I can imagine when you're saying fantasy movie, trilogy, shot back to back, big budget. I can imagine that the studios were probably a little like, a little sketchy. We're not so sure that that's a great idea,
And this kind of money. I mean, we talk about like those other precedent films. Like there's nothing that I recall as having spent the sort of money, even relative, to currency 20 years prior, that competes with what they attempted to do or what they did here for these movies. That's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary swing.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, it took New Line and Warner Brothers, it was just a lot of confidence in Jackson and his team that they could actually pull this off. And I think when they were able to show some of these images that Alan Lee and John Howe had come up with, as far as the different spaces of the world that they wanted to create, and they showed that Weta could do this, and they could do it all in New Zealand, where it wasn't going to be as much money as if they were trying to do it in LA or somewhere else. It gave them the confidence that they needed to move forward with it. And I don't feel like we necessarily need to go into the production history of this too much, because holy cow. I mean, if you watch these films and if you have them on, I'm assuming on the digital versions too, but the physical media is like, it is, many more hours of documentary behind the scenes footage. Like, how did they get these things made than the length of the film? Like, it's just, there's so much content about how they got these things made. It's a stunning process that they went through to do it. And so that's, I think, just something that's really cool. Definitely worth looking at. I don't know if we need to, have too much of a conversation about it since it's been talked about already so much.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's fine. Let's do what we do. Go watch the behind the scenes because it's extraordinary. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's fantastic to watch how they bring this world to life. I mean, let's just say as are there highlights to the production that really light you up?
That's a tricky question because, I mean, I could name a highlight probably from every single department.
Well, yes.
On this film. Like, it's like everything about this lights me up. I like the character design lights me up. Like the
costume design,
the locations that they chose, the bigatures and the worlds that they ended up creating, the sets they built, the props they made, the hair and makeup, like everything about this film, they captured a perfect representation of kind of like what I would see in my head as I would read these books. And it's just, I mean, it's a stunning thing. And then just, I mean, you've already talked about it, but just like in a world where you have these hobbits and dwarves and regular sized people, what Peter Jackson and his team figured out as far as forced perspective or using different sized actors to play these when they're all in the same shots with each other, or and trying to limit how much actual CG they needed. Like it your brain just buys into the fact that these are people of all different sizes, and it's pretty impressive the way that they captured it all.
Yeah, that's for my money. That's where it is. The other is, this movie dealing with starting to push on the bounds of what is believable in terms of scale of fights, and not making things like the way for me, Moria, the way Moria is architected, the way that fight is architected in small spaces with bows and arrows and sword swinging and all of those things, and a troll, like those. I watched that and I'm just profoundly moved by the way that entire sequence is architected in a way that makes sense to me, that makes sense as a viewer. I never feel like I get lost in it. And I think what we might find, I'll say what we will find is, I know at least one of us has more concerns on that very point in subsequent films in this series. I don't want to speak for you, man, but I know things start to get a little bit messy on the bigger fights, and it's still fantastic. But this movie is the sweet spot for me in terms of being able to make sense of many characters in a broad ensemble cast and not lose the thread.
Interesting. I will certainly look forward to those conversations. But it's interesting you're kind of talking about like that with the scope that they were developing as far as creating these massive battles and all of that. And just speaking to effects, I definitely, like, as I was watching this again, I was noting, I'm like, okay, well, let's, like, what is there in here that I don't buy as much? And so I was trying to say, okay, do I buy that? And there are a couple moments of the forced perspective where sometimes it feels like, well, I don't think they're really next to each other. Or there's always a moment when I think it's when Aragorn tosses Sam across the broken stairs as they're fleeing through the mines. And that shot of him coming toward camera and then being caught by, I think, I'm not sure which person catches him, but whoever it is, you're looking at Sam's face, and just like the movement of him through space and keeping that forced perspective always like seems a little funky to me. Like that effect never quite completely works. Like that's one of those moments where I'm like, not quite there, but it's close enough.
That's fair.
Yeah. And there was another one, I think it's when the orcs pick up Merry and Pippin also. That's another one where I'm like, there's something is a little funky there. The one creature that has never really worked that well for me. And I don't know if it's because it's night or because it's wet or because it's dark and like kind of not really moonlit, but it's the whatever the creature is that's in the lake outside of the door to the mines of Moria.
Yeah. Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, whatever that is.
That creature has never quite looked right. It's always been like, I'm not sure what that, it looks just like some wet, muddy creature. And I don't know. It's always kind of frustrated me a little bit that I never buy it,
That's funny. I've never had an issue with that one. When things come into question for me, I do agree with you. When Merry and Pippin get picked up by the orcs, it feels a little bit forced, especially after at that point 2+ hours of having really successful scale, accomplishments. It's funny when one thing stands out. That to me is the thing. But I've never really been taken out of the movie with any of the big monsters. The trolls look great. The Balrog looks great. All Balrog, of those things are I think really extraordinary.
Yeah, and it's just a minor thing, but it is always something that I notice, and I'm always like, I wish that kind of looked a little better. Now, I suppose there is this point with the film where when it starts and we're having some of the flashbacks to, or it's not flashbacks, but Galadriel is kind of setting up the story and how Gollum found this ring and Bilbo found it from him after it fell off of Gollum's fingers. And there's a part of me that is like, gosh, I kind of wish that Martin Freeman was in there in that one little shot of him when he's finding it, because that's just one of those things. And I know it's such a minor thing, but it always goes through my head now, like, oh well.
Yeah, I remember having this feeling, though, when Lord of the Rings came out. I was like baffled that they were going to throw so much money at Lord of the Rings without making The Hobbit first. Like, it just felt broken to me. Like, there was so much story in The Hobbit about the ring. And this is the journey of the ring to Mordor. Like, let's tell the story of how the ring gets in the Hobbit's hands in the first place. And that felt missing. It felt like making chapter 2 before chapter 1, and that was bonkers. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Ultimately, it's fine. Like, if it's important to me, I can always watch the Hobbit series first, but who's going to do that? Like, that's insanity.
Well,
why would I sit through
would.
Why would I sit through all those movies at high frame rate when I could just watch The Lord of the Rings?
I wouldn't watch them at high frame rate, but I like the Hobbit movies. They're not as enjoyable as these, but I still like them. And I think there's definitely a little bit of a tonal shift because of the feel of the book, which definitely was written for a younger audience.
Yes.
But just to your point, though, I felt that what Jackson actually did with, we should say with, of course, his writing team, writing this with Philippa Boyens and his wife, Fran Walsh, of actually like introducing the film with this narration by Cate Blanchett as Galadriel, setting everything up. And so I actually felt like I wasn't missing The Hobbit because of that fantastically written setup for this film that we have, where we really get a sense of all of that. And so I wasn't missing that. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, no, and that's what I mean. Like, once I saw the movies, like, it was okay. And I think the setup of this movie, particularly in the extended edition, when you add the concerning hobbits back once again, I think is really great.
So, question about a few story points, because there are a few moments in this film where we're treated to some cinematic fake outs. And I wonder if they work for you, if it's too many, or if it's too few, or if it's just right, just like the Three Bears. We have a moment where our heroes they've encountered Strider, aka Aragorn, in the Prancing Pony. He has now told them, he's here to help, blah blah blah, and then we see the riders, the black riders, these Nazgul, crash through the gates into the town of Bree. They come into the Prancing Pony. We see the innkeeper kind of cowering behind a counter as they all kind of move past him in their freaky way. They go into the room and they hold their swords over the beds, and then they stab, only to reveal that it's just a bunch of feathers underneath. And, as we're seeing all this, we're kind of intercutting to all of the hobbits asleep, only to find out, they're actually asleep in the inn across the street. Strider was smart enough to kind of pick a different place. And so the Nazgul are tricked. We have our first little fake out there. Later, in the Mines of Moria, as everybody's, fighting inside Balin's tomb, we have, this cave troll that gets in. They've killed all the goblins, but this cave troll is kind of taking all of them to battle. And the cave troll grabs a spear and stabs Frodo, who kind of collapses and everyone thinks he's dead and is very sad, only to reveal as he rolls over that he's totally fine because he was wearing Bilbo's mithril coat. And mithril, of course, is basically a bulletproof vest, and it kept him from getting injured at all, didn't even get a bruise, and he's totally fine. And so we have those two fake outs. How do they work for you? Because I don't recall them being so, constructed to be fake outs in the book.
In the book, wow, that would be a tough comparison for me to make in terms of the cinematic fake out. I did not have a problem with them at all. I really didn't. The one of the prancing pony, I think, would be the more legitimate, that falls more legitimately in the term fake out for me, because they're really trying to trick me, right? They're trying to trick me to build intensity and build the fear that something's going to happen to the poor hobbits. As an audience member, I already knew about the mithril coat, and because I've seen Frodo putting it on. So I think it's rational for me to see him getting hit by the troll and think, he's probably going to be fine because of that thing that I saw 2.5 hours ago, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
that one didn't bug me. Neither of them bugged me, but that one doesn't feel like a fake out because an audience member, I was already in on the joke, even though the party wasn't. In this case, I do find that the trick of the stabbing of the mattresses is. It's fine. I like feeling like that's a building of intensity. That's what the movie's supposed to do. Did that hit you sideways?
Oh, no. But it does feel like a cinematic trick that they're amping up the tension of the scene by kind of constructing it that way purposefully, saying, we're going to make the audience think that, because, obviously not everyone who saw the movie had read the books, but we're doing it in a way where it's going to seem like these guys are in the room and they are actually going to kill all of our hobbits. And so it was just an interesting cinematic tool, I think, that Jackson and co. introduced into the script to kind of give us this extra tension here. And it worked for me. I don't know if we needed it, but I thought that it actually worked pretty well.
Yeah, I do too. And especially when I think of the alternative, right? The alternative is we have a scene of Strider, I don't know, they all go up to the room and Strider's standing on the roof and he's sneaking them out of the window so nobody knows that they're moving across the street, right? I don't know, something to demonstrate the transfer from inn to inn. Totally deflates the intensity of that sequence when the Black Riders are there. And the Black Riders, if any group in this movie, demands intensity. And so I'm fine with it. I think our introduction to the Black Riders, when we have the little story of the Black Riders, but then when they all hide under the log, that's like a quintessential Lord of the Rings fellowship moment. From the book too, from the animated series, we have the Black Rider looking over the log. Incredibly intense.
And sniffing.
Oh, it's so great. It's great and disgusting and scary and all of the above, and all the insects come out. What an awesome addition to that sequence to make that just look so real and dirty and awesome. Every one of the Black Rider sequences needs this level of intensity, and using just a straight up filmmaking trick, an editing trick to make that happen is awesome. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure in our catalog, there is a clip of me saying how much I hate being tricked by this kind of stuff. But here it works.
No, it's fine. I think it's fine. Actually, I should say the thing that probably, I wonder, they said it, and I'm like, I wonder if he's irritated about this, because they say, and here you are, the Fellowship of the Ring.
It's in my notes, Andy. We hadn't gotten to the departure of the Fellowship yet, but I would have gotten there.
Yep. Oh, so funny. So funny.
You brought up your sense of comedy and the tonal change in comedy from the between this and The Hobbit, and I'm curious your take on the use of comedy in this movie, because we have some characters that are dedicated to the comedic moments, and how well they're used, I think, might define your love or not of the character. For me, I see Merry and Pippin as a locus of comedic energy because of their relationship. It's written so funny. Do you think he knows about second breakfast, right? These little bits of dialogue that we get are fantastic. And the other is Gimli, using Gimli as sort of a comedic punching bag just because of the difference in culture and stature and all of the things that dwarves bring to the table when they have their noted animosity between dwarves and elves. I'm curious your take on those elements, the comedic elements in the movie. How fair do you think they are? And note, I'm using this as a bookmark again as we chart the tonal changes through the last two movies as well.
There's definitely comedy, and it's definitely kind of an introduction to it, because I don't recall there being that much comedy with any of the characters in Tolkien's writings. I
don't think he's a noted high fantasy comic writer.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, I think there is definitely joy in some of the comedic characters created, like Merry and Pippin. It really kind of lends to the, that sense concerning hobbits of that type of character and these simpler people. And I don't know, it's just the way that Merry and Pippin were created. I think I end up enjoying it so much because I felt like they were written well, played well by our two actors playing them. I have so much fun watching Billy Boyd and Dominique Monaghan as Merry and Pippin. They are really fun. They capture kind of that essence. And to your point, it's not necessarily going to be kind of this consistent, goofy thread of the characters over the next few films. It's like we're starting in a lighter tone, and over the course of this entire trilogy, there's going to be kind of this shift as some of that comedy is kind of cut back on. And it's, we're going from a happier place to a time of great strife and struggle as they go into battle and everything. And the next film, we're starting that film with them they have been taken by the orcs, and now they are having to deal with all of that. And so it's an interesting shift in them. And yeah, same thing with Gimli, particularly in his relationship with Legolas, because there's kind of this natural animosity built into the all of Tolkien's writings between dwarfs and elves. And so that is definitely kind of kept up consistently. And probably I'd say their comedy kind of extends farther through the trilogy, because even like when we're doing through the second and even the third film, in all of our big battle scenes, they are still like having battle or, competitions as far as like who has killed the most and that sort of thing. So they definitely keep that up with those characters. And I think I don't know, I feel like they're allowing it to play in a fun way where you get this sense of, it builds the sense of camaraderie with the characters and allows for them to kind of, the actors in particular, to really find something fun to play with in the characters themselves.
Yeah, I think in this movie in particular, it's great, right? I like that element in this movie, particularly because I don't think it goes too far, and I don't think it becomes tired. And I'm curious, and it's now been several years since I've watched the last two movies, and with this question in mind, is there any point later that it feels like it goes from what I think it accomplishes here, developing a relationship with a broader audience quadrant, right? Like younger kids might be laughing at Gimli in a way that brings them into the universe more, to the point yet in later movies where the bickering might not be as funny anymore in the darker elements of the movie. That's my big sort of central question around how this film handles comedy. It feels like it's used as a tool to build affinity with the characters for a broader audience segment, and does that continue to work later? I think that's an interesting question for me.
Well, I think we should kind of continue this conversation about kind of the comedy level as we kind of discuss each film.
Yes.
In this particular film, I don't really have any issues. I don't feel like once we get once we get to the Mines of Moria and we're past the point where Gandalf falls in his battle with the Balrog, I feel like there's definitely that kind of darker tone as everybody is kind of now struggling and mourning, and I don't feel like there's really as much of the comedy through the end of the film at all, and smartly. And I suppose that's kind of the smart construction of the script, where we're not kind of allowing that to play out at that point.
Agreed.
Yeah. Now, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely something to kind of consider over the course of these films. But what are we meant to feel as an audience about the cave trolls?
What are we meant to feel? Okay.
And I say this because, and I feel like I want to just kind of continue this exploration over the course of this trilogy. And I want to look at this as we watch, because as we know, Peter Jackson has always had an affinity for King Kong, and that's a very tragic story about this giant gorilla and this tragedy about this creature who, humans drag to their world and then realize he just really, this is not a place for him, and he ends up, we end up killing him and he falls and dies.
Sure.
In this film, of course, the goblins, they kill all the goblins. The cave troll, they bring the cave troll, the goblins do. And, we've got that great line from Boromir's like, oh, they've brought a cave troll, like very frustrated that now they've got to deal with that. And the cave troll comes in and is giving them a lot of grief. But I can't help but feel like Jackson is giving us this sense of tragedy as they fight and finally kill this cave troll. Like, it takes a lot of fighting to actually bring him down. Like, at one point, Legolas is on top of his head and shoots an arrow into his skull, and then at the end he shoots like an arrow up into its throat, into its brain, and you just hear this kind of this sad as it's like struggling, and it collapses and dies. The music feels a little sadder, and everybody's just kind of standing there as this cave troll falls and collapses. And I can't help but feel like, is this Jackson's King Kong in this film? Like, these big creatures that are forced into servitude by these goblins. They don't really probably want to be there to fight. They're obviously not as smart as the mountain trolls that we have in The Hobbit, who are eating the ponies and the hobbits. It just seems like this dumb creature, and we will see them. I can't remember if we see them in Two Towers. Actually, I think we do during the Battle of Helm's Deep. But definitely in the third film, and we'll see them where it seems like they are kind of being used and abused by the people taking care of them. And so that's why I'm like, is this the King Kong of the franchise?
Well, and I love that you bring it up that way, because it hadn't occurred to me. But as you're talking, I'm trying to think of any other creatures in this series that don't have an express motivation of good or evil, right? The cave troll feels like a manifestation or a tool. It is, the cave troll is as much a battering ram that we see in the later films as it is, at less a malevolent character, right? It feels like like the rest of the characters. You're right. The mountain trolls, they eat hobbitses, right? The Gollum is we have Gollum. We get a little bit of sympathy as we hear more and more of his story later. But at this point, he's just a malevolent entity of greed. And so it's curious to me, to the same extent that you could see in this movie, the orcs themselves are a manifestation of evil as a tool. But would they necessarily, if they were not given a job, would they just create a little, sort of vegetationless plot and live out their lives? I wonder.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, but to a certain extent, like at least with the orcs, though, like they clearly have brains enough to kind of communicate and create their own civilization, as it were. And the way that he's creating the cave troll is almost like what he does with the elephants later in the third film. It's just a creature, and it's just an animal that is kind of being used and abused by the evil army to fight. And to that end, I can't help but think that Jackson is really intending us to have this sense of, oh, poor cave troll.
Yeah, I wonder what the cave troll culture is. Like, do they do cave troll cage fighting? Like, where they bet against them? Like, is this it? Like, what is the cave troll corollary to our world? Is it dog fighting? Is it cockfighting? Is it like, what is the awful thing that they do with cave trolls that we can relate to?
Yeah, there's a sad story.
Yeah,
Flight of the
somebody
cave
needs
troll.
to make that movie.
Somewhere out there in this multiverse, Hermione Granger is creating a group to petition people to stop the abuse of cave trolls.
The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter cinematic universe.
That's right.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the cast a little bit. I can't help but feel this cast is perfect, and I want to run through other options because there were a number of different people who had been offered some of these roles or who had even started performing some of these roles and things were changed. And I just want to get your sense of thoughts as far as the where they landed from options they had.
Some of this is hysterically funny to me.
Yes. Can you see Jake Gyllenhaal playing Frodo?
No, of course not. No.
Okay. He auditioned.
Can you see Jake Gyllenhaal?
No,
That's
not at all. Elijah Wood ends up like so perfectly embodying Frodo.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Now, as far as Ian McKellen, it was, common, I don't know, I thought it was common knowledge, maybe not, but Sean Connery was actually offered the part, but didn't really understand it. And so, he passed and later regretted it.
This is the thing I think we've talked about this on the show, how funny it is that Sean Connery didn't take this role because he didn't understand the plot of the story. And instead, because he was talking to his kids/grandkids, they said, you got to do a fantasy movie like this. So he said, okay, here's the next one. I guess I just have to say yes. And did the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
I know. So sad.
Amazing story.
Yep. Other people who either were considered for Gandalf or they had wanted but never approached. Patrick Stewart, they actually asked him, but he turned it down because he didn't like the script. Patrick McGoohan was offered it, but he had health issues, so had to decline. Christopher Plummer turned it down. Sam Neill turned it down because he was busy with Jurassic Park 3. And McKellen was then offered it, but had to deal with his schedule because he was there were conflicts with X-Men, and so they had to kind of adjust the schedule, but they did land on him. Thank the Lord, because he is so perfect.
Well, I'm curious. I mean, you ran through those names pretty quickly. Is there anyone in that list that you could also have seen adapt to this role?
Perhaps
Sam Neill is right out.
Yeah, Sam Neill, I'm like, really? Okay. I don't know if I would have picked Sam Neill as my choice. Patrick McGoohan is probably the one I could see the most. And maybe it's because, I don't know, when I think of him, I already am thinking kind of that kind of older times. You know, he seems somebody in period. And maybe it's because I'm generally thinking of him from like Braveheart, where he's the king. But also he does have a little bit of an angrier look, maybe not as kind of look, at least, in my thinking of him. So maybe that would have made it harder for me to see. But
yeah,
Patrick Stewart, I could have seen, but it's interesting. He just didn't like the script at all.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it's not like he had a dearth of other things to contend with, right? I mean, at the time, he was still, he's such so deeply into the Star Trek Picard roles, but I find it fascinating. I see him as a more diminutive man. Like, I think it would be harder to portray him as with the largesse that I think is required of Gandalf. I could absolutely see Plummer playing the role. That would have been fascinating to me to see Christopher Plummer in this role. I could have done that. I think what they did with McKellen is extraordinary, and he's amazing. And now I can see nobody else, but I could have seen Plummer take this on for sure.
Yeah. Another very famous one was Stuart Townsend, who was actually cast as Aragorn, and then, which, I mean, boggles my mind because I see Stuart Townsend, I'm like, really? I just don't see it at all.
Yeah.
He ended up getting replaced once they started production because Peter Jackson realized that he was too young for the part, and so brought Viggo Mortensen on. But before that, they actually offered it to Daniel Day-Lewis, who turned it down, Nicolas Cage, but he declined. And I guess Vin Diesel had auditioned, but they didn't pick him. And actually, after Stuart Townsend was cast and they realized he was wrong, they actually thought about Russell Crowe, but he actually turned it down because he didn't want to be typecast since he had just done Gladiator.
What a relief, because I think Viggo Mortensen is extraordinary. And I would never have imagined Viggo Mortensen in this role, given the kind of stuff that he was already doing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's such an interesting journey for that particular character.
Yeah.
Sean Bean got Boromir, but Liam Neeson was sent the script but passed. And Bruce Willis said he was interested because he's a big fan of the books, but they didn't even consider him. I don't know. Like, again, Sean Bean, and maybe it's just because of the memes and everything, but it's so hard to kind of step away from Sean Bean in that role.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Willis, Liam Neeson, like these I can't imagine. Neeson, I can imagine over Willis because you're just being having a better accent.
Yeah,
but it's really Sean Bean. It's really Sean Bean. That was perfect.
Right. Billy Connolly actually wanted, or he was considered for the part of Gimli, but they ended up giving it to John Rhys Davies. But they couldn't let go of the idea of Billy Connolly playing a dwarf. So in the Hobbit films, he ended up playing Ironfoot in those. And so he did get a chance to actually play the part, which is great.
Yeah.
Helena Bonham Carter was interested in playing Arwen, but this was the one role that they're like, we'd really love to have a Hollywood star in the film, at least one. And so Liv Tyler at the time was that. And so that gave them their little moment to cast a Hollywood person. And I love Liv Tyler in the role of Arwen. I think she really feels so natural in the part.
And we have some big Liv Tyler news. She's about to come back into the light, into the Marvel light. Did you hear that?
Yes, indeed.
Been a long, long time.
That's
right.
Interesting
to see her back in the MCU.
Now, here's an interesting thing. Can you imagine, instead of Cate Blanchett playing Galadriel, just close your eyes.
Bruce Willis.
Close your eyes and picture this. No, even better. Better.
Mm-hmm.
Lucy Lawless.
Alas, Andy, I cannot.
Now, I know she had Xena for many, many years, but that's the strangest possible choice to consider.
I can't quite imagine the transition from Xena Warrior Princess. I mean, you could hear Warrior Princess and maybe get there, but you'd have to squint pretty hard.
Oh, yeah, that's the version of the Lord of the Rings that was not the right version. Definitely not the right version.
Yeah, but you know what? That's a really good point. Like how careful that and how fragile that line is that you have to walk in casting fantasy characters in high fantasy movies. Like, true,
right?
Absolutely, but it's just like you also could have cast, who was it that played Beastmaster, right? Like he could have been Aragorn for sure, but it would have been a very different movie.
Yeah.
Not the movie that we're talking about, 22 years later.
Exactly. This one should come as no surprise. Christopher Lee is such a fan of Tolkien's books. He's one of the people who reads it every year. He's met J.R.R. Tolkien, and he actually auditioned, but for Gandalf. And that was one of those roles that Jackson said, you're too old for that part, but you would be perfect as Saruman the White. And is he ever?
He is.
In fact, his story about when he gets stabbed in the back in the third film is a highlight, and I'm sure we'll chat about it at that point.
But I'm curious about the age issue. Like, can you see, like, all they did to Gandalf was age him up, like, for McKellen. I don't understand that. He's behind a giant beard anyway.
He's behind a giant beard, but I mean, I think that they were about, 17 years apart, those two. And I just feel like when I see Ian McKellen, I can still see him being pretty mobile and doing things like a lot more actively. Whereas when I see Christopher Lee, I don't know if maybe coming right off of Attack of the Clones. Actually, that would have been right after these, but because he wasn't in the first one. But I don't know if I would have seen Christopher Lee as somebody who I felt was as spry a person. So I don't know.
Yeah, spry. That's a good consideration. Yeah, it's more than looks.
Yeah. Hugo Weaving plays Elrond, but actually David Bowie wanted the part. Peter Jackson, though, smartly said, to have a famous beloved character and a famous star colliding is slightly uncomfortable. And I think that's a valuable point to have brought up there, because I think that is one of those things that, I mean, you know, he's great in Labyrinth, but you also can't watch it without going, oh, but that's David Bowie playing the part.
But, you know, he's also great in The Prestige, right?
Yeah, but that's just like a bit part. Like and it does feel a little bit like stunt casting.
Does it really to you? I don't. I really like him. I can see the reticence in casting him in that role, but I also think like it. I could see him. I think he could have pulled it off. And I'm also not saying I would prefer him over Hugo Weaving. I mean, Hugo Weaving is legendary.
Yeah,
is Elrond legendary.
One of his legendary trilogies that he's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ian Holm, of course, did the radio adaptation. He played Frodo in the radio show. And Jackson remembered the performance and offered him the part. But he had a backup just in case Holm said no. And it was, in fact, Sylvester McCoy, who ends up playing Radagast the Brown in The Hobbit. So obviously that was a name that he kept handy as well, so that he could bring back when they did The Hobbit.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's a very interesting list of actors and performers, and just like you look at what they ended up bringing to the table as far as this cast, and it's just stunning and it's perfect. And like I can't think of a single one where I'm like, I still kind of wish they would have had a different person play that part. Like I don't. There's not a single one.
Do you have any standout orcs? We have Lawrence Makware as Lurtz, the commander of the Uruk-hai, and he gets some fantastic evil hero moments, which were just great. And I don't want to leave this conversation without having a conversation about how the orcs are handled in these movies, because we start talking about the animated series, like the orcs look very different in the animated series and didn't look quite as threatening to me in the animated, at least in the first animated version. My memory of the orcs is, they're kind of like walking gray bubbles.
Well, I love, the creation of the orcs, the goblins, the Uruk-hai, the Black Riders. They're so horrifying. And, you have that birth scene of the Uruk-hai as they kind of pull him out of that sack, that kind of gross embryonic sack thing that they're growing these things in. And it's just gruesome, and it feels so raw and visceral and dirty. It's just like, it's such a surprisingly perfect way to create incredibly creepy villains that all look great. They're terrifying, and I'm so impressed with the makeup jobs and the creature designs that they came up with for these films. And I love how you've got kind of that, as Lurtz is kind of walking through the forest at the end, he's got that like that white hand marking painted onto his face, kind of like when Saruman touched him, as you kind of put his hand on his face, like they're all part of this army of Sarumans. And it's just, I don't know, it just all lends to this wonderfully kind of just a really creepy group of characters. And when you have Sauron talking to Saruman and saying, build me an army, and this is what you get, you're like, yep, that's about what I expected for an evil army.
Yeah. Well, an evil army, and as a manifestation of their dual role of antagonist, right? Which is like, not only are they chasing the Fellowship and they're trying to get the ring, but they're also manifestation of anti-environmentalism, right? Like it is watching them destroy the landscape and pull the trees with their deep roots down and build these underground, and that they are born of the same earth which they are destroying, which is, I think, just a fantastic bit of treatment in these films is fantastic, because we get to feel our hate of them before they even get into the mode of really attacking our principal characters, right? Like, we hate them already because of what they're doing to their own land and what that looks like. And I think it is grotesque and wonderful in the way they're portrayed.
Yeah, and I mean your point, which definitely warrants just bringing it up again, but that whole focus of the idea of industry versus environment, that was such a key part of Tolkien's focus on these stories. I mean that's handled incredibly well as you see Saruman representing industry and what industry does to the environment as far as ripping everything down and destroying it and digging in it and just mutilating all aspects of anything that feels like part of nature. It just like it's all gone, and that opposite the elves and kind of how earthy and tree loving and everything they are. It's such an interesting, like you go from that and then you go to see Lothlorien and you see these elves like living in harmony with the trees, and it's just like it's such a difference, and that will definitely continue over the course of this series as you kind of get that. And it was very important to Tolkien, and it really shows the way that Jackson and his team created all of these spaces.
And you don't get much of him, but we do have Gollum.
Yes. Another element that I know Peter Jackson came, once they were doing the second and third films, he would talk about how he kind of wished he could go back into the first film and tweak it. I'm glad he hasn't. It's fine. And again, same thing that I mentioned about, I kind of wish Martin Freeman was in there. But at the same time, it's like, you know what, this film is perfect the way it is. You don't want to change any of that. And yeah, you get little flashes of Gollum because, again, they hadn't quite figured out what they were doing with Gollum for the second and third films. Just enough to give you a sense of this creature that is desperate to get the ring back and who's following them because he wants it so badly. And a valuable lesson that Gandalf is going to instill in Frodo about the idea of, being careful about killing things. And that's, I think, such a valuable lesson that he teaches Frodo in that moment, because there are points where Frodo could have, like in the next film, where he could kill Gollum, but it's like, well, he's lucky he didn't, because he really needed Gollum to actually make it through the entire rest of this whole thing. So,
and of course, the challenges that Peter Jackson had figuring out what they're going to do with this character on screen were not lost on Andy Serkis, who had the same challenges with figuring out if he was going to even take this role. And so lucky that he did, because it becomes a transformational point in his career too, and makes him a central figure in the motion capture business and his ability to act and portray. And it is one of the, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, one of the great losses, in his professional career, that a motion capture performance like this hasn't been given more industry and awards acclaim, because he is incredibly good as this character.
From this, he really creates an entire business for himself of doing this and training people how to do this motion capture acting. I mean, it's so fascinating how he's developed this into a thing. And I mean, he's also has his own career. He's also acting. He's been getting
and a great director,
plenty of other things. Yeah. So it's not like he hasn't been only doing motion capture work. So it's great to see that he's been keeping so busy with all this. Two other things that I want to bring up. One is the look. I want to chat a little bit about the way that Peter Jackson shoots his these films in particular, and just try to get a read from you as to how does his style and his approach. A lot of times he will have these kind of like wider angle lenses, like moving into characters' faces. A lot of like these big camera moves like into somebody, and the lens, it's not like a wide angle like fisheye lens or something, but it's definitely a wider than normal lens. And so you move in on someone's face and there's a little bit of that distortion, and the angle kind of goes a little Dutch, and there's a lot of that sort of movement throughout. And also, just to mention, like coming from the sorts of films that Jackson had done previously, like very specifically, I'm thinking of Heavenly Creatures, where in their fantasy worlds that the characters were creating, they ended up having these kind of characters that all felt like they were made with like clay faces. And you definitely get some of that style of creature design, particularly when Frodo goes into his, I just call it the kind of the shadow zone where he's wearing
I was
the
going to
ring.
mention.
And specifically when they're on Weathertop and the five Black Riders are up there and he puts the ring on and you get the shadow version of the Nazgul and they look like these kings, once kings who kind of have that same sort of clay face that Jackson was such a fan of in some of his other films. What do you think of what Jackson is bringing to this in his own directorial style and influences?
Well, I think you're right. The movie certainly has its own tone, and a tone that is absolutely consistent with across the 3 films and expanded into the 6 films of The Hobbit. I think, to the same effect, though less so in The Hobbit. The Hobbit, I think, pushes things forward in a way that's interesting, if not palatable to all. This movie, I feel like, is the way they use the wides is really interesting in and around the use of, or the portrayal of the ring as a character, right? Because the ring has its own identity. It has a voice that we hear in the black speech, the dark speech. When we see the ring in a character's hand, right, using those wide angles, sort of almost macro, right, on the ring, but actually it's a giant ring that they're shooting super wide. Like, I think all of those things really add to the character of the place, and I don't notice it as much when we're just shooting characters in world, but when we go into the ring world and we see, as you say, the Nazgul with the clay faces and their outfits, which become almost watercolor, like the sort of juxtaposition of those tones in that black world on top of being kind of the X-ray, almost X-ray kind of color timing is incredible and scary, and it brings a real high degree of texture. I think we get what are the other areas when we move into the Uruk-hai and sort of Sauron the White's area, and we go to the tower and start seeing the eye as it manifests between those giant forks. That's when another sequence where we end up seeing big things shot close and wide. And I think it works really, really well. It does give the film a solid personality.
I think that's exactly it. And I was trying to remember. I'm like, did I remember seeing much of this particular shooting style, like the way that he was moving the camera in previous or subsequent films? And I can't remember very specifically. And maybe in like something like Dead Alive, there might have been some of that, and kind of because it's such a horror comedy, and that camera movement certainly has this kind of Sam Raimi. It can have that kind of goofiness when it's kind of moving in on people with a wide angle lens and distorting them. And I was trying to remember, like, how much of that is in just his regular style versus how much of that was something that he imbued in Middle-earth as he kind of wanted to kind of craft the story here with that specific look. And I can't remember specifically, but I do really enjoy his style, and I think that it works well. I think, if anything, there's one shot, oh gosh, it's toward the end of the film when they're in, I can't remember the name of the place, but just kind of that hillside where the Uruk-hai, they're all fighting, and there's a shot where it feels like the camera's on a wire over the forest, and it's just kind of moving across just to kind of give you a sense of scope of stuff as they're doing it. But I'm never satisfied with that shot. It always feels like it's never either as full as it needs to be or as moving the way that I feel like it should be moving. Like, it's not like a drone, it's pre-drone. And so it's one of those shots that I know he does. He really likes those over the battle shots to give you a sense of scope. But that was an early one before they were doing as much of the CG sorts of shots. And so it just always felt like it's a camera on a wire floating through the forest,
Yeah, right.
But otherwise, I'm really impressed with the way that he crafts these stories.
Yeah.
The last note that I wanted to bring up, because as much as all of the crew is bringing their all to this story and crafting something that is so perfect, I just have to call out Howard Shore and his score, because the music in this, like what Howard Shore ended up doing with this, is just mind-boggling and stunning. Like the way that he found such interesting instrumentation to kind of represent the different groups, and really went for that operatic thematic style of music where he crafted themes for everything. To the point where, like, when the elephants come in the third film, like they have their own little theme. Like everything has its own theme. It's just, that is such a masterful way to kind of have built this in such a big bombastic way. I love this score, and it just hits me every time I'm listening how his music for this is such a key part of it.
Well, and I think part of that is, just knowing how much Peter Jackson likes music, right? And has such great attentiveness to the sound and tone of every single frame. Like, it just feels like everything is underscored with either wonderful sound or great score hits. I think it's really great. Just in terms of Jackson, like, where do you stand on other non-Hobbit / Middle-earth explorations of Jackson's filmmaking?
Well, he's I think a fun filmmaker who has a lot of joy with the projects that he makes. But I've never saw Bad Taste. I saw Meet the Feebles, and I didn't care for that at all. It was just a little much, it's just kind of a satire on the puppet, like Muppet sorts of things. I just didn't dig it. Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive. I love that one. I have so much fun with it. It makes me laugh every time. Heavenly Creatures, incredibly creative story that really kind of got them on the map because they got an Oscar nomination for the script with that one. The Frighteners, I had a great time with that one. I don't think I loved it, but I still had a great time with it. Very fun movie. Michael J. Fox, Dee Wallace, and Jake Busey, R. Lee Ermey. It's a very fun film.
I feel like it's good to bring up Dee Wallace just because, she called us wussies that one time.
That's right. King Kong, I thought he did a great revisioning of King Kong, although I think it was definitely another example of just like, let's let him do whatever he wants. And it ended up feeling really bloated.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the 3 Hobbit films and The Lovely Bones, which is other than Bad Taste, the only film of his that I never watched. And I just didn't hear much that was good about it, other than the fact that Stanley Tucci was great in the film and got an Oscar nomination for his performance. And then I never saw the documentary that he did, They Shall Not Grow Old.
2 documentaries. Like, we talk about the Beatles Get Back, that 3-part massive thing. It's technically a quote miniseries, so I know you probably didn't see it or wouldn't, but it was apart from being long-winded, if you like the Beatles, you will love this thing. It's weirdly well put together, but this is the thing about these last 2 pieces, right? Between the Beatles and They Shall Not Grow Old. I saw They Shall Not Grow Old theatrically. These are the things where he's taking old film and modernizing it, right? Like he's trying to make it palatable and to recover it, to restore it in some new ways, right? New technology bringing to bear on these very, very old bits of original film, in some cases quite decayed original film, and making it, something that feels human again, especially in the case of They Shall Not Grow Old, taking this old war footage and, presenting it at normal frame rates for us. So it doesn't look like these, soldiers are running across battlefields at super high speed, right? He's really normalizing all of that and colorizing it. So he's really taking a Turner approach to old footage. It's extraordinary.
And giving them voice too, right?
And giving them voice. There's no other way to say it than it's extraordinary. Does it feel legitimate to the time that he's creating? I never really got that. I never really got into that zone. Same thing with the Beatles, like taking all of this back footage of their like rehearsals and practices, all gearing up toward this rooftop concert. Some cases, like giving them a voice that doesn't quite line up with what it feels like they're saying, or applying voice when heads are turned, so because you think that's what you heard them say, it doesn't always line up for me, and so it just feels a little bit faked in a way that's inauthentic. So as beautiful a parade of technology as he's put together, as a documentarian, I struggled with them personally. I struggled. So yeah, your mileage may vary.
And those are just like what he's directing, because he's also like, I mean, he produced District 9, he produced Adventures of Tintin, and I know there had been a lot of talk of like, is he going to direct it? Is Spielberg going to direct it? Like, where's that going to go? And because they're both such fans of the character and the stories. So I think they'll probably continue working if they keep making those things. And then to your point about the documentaries, he also produced the documentary West of Memphis, which, got some good feedback. And then I know Mortal Engines was another one that I don't know if he was going to ever direct, but I know that he produced and ended up writing it with Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens again. And I just remember it looked okay. And then I just remember like it just kind of turned into a big old flop when it came out. And so I was like, well, I guess I don't need to see that one at all.
Well, we did. That's another one we did see. And because my kids were big fans of the books, it just didn't take. The movie just didn't take. It felt like an unfaithful adaptation of the source material that nobody in my family at least could quite wrap their heads around. But it's Hugo Weaving. That's fun. So
yeah.
Anyway, your mileage may vary.
But Jackson, I think, is a fascinating character, and I don't know if I've heard like what he's up to now. I mean, have you heard? Is there anything that he's actually working on at this particular point in time?
What is he? Is he directing anything coming? That's actually a great question.
That's what. Yeah,
I'm not seeing. I mean, he's got a couple of upcoming production credits. Untitled third Tintin film, second and third Tintin sequels. As a producer, he's got. It looks like he's slated to direct the sequel to Adventures of Tintin. Okay.
So that's, I think, one of those things that he and Spielberg had been kind of in partnership with as far as developing all of those and getting them made. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I am curious, where is he going to go? Because I feel like, I don't know, I just find him to be such a fascinating storyteller. I don't want to feel like The Lord of the Rings was kind of his peak, but at this point it kind of feels like it, because you could argue with the other ones. I mean, certainly there was success with King Kong and the Hobbit trilogy, but I think mileage may vary with any of those films. I feel like, that Lord of the Rings, that trilogy in the early aughts really kind of seems where most of his, the height of his success happened.
Well, yeah, you have to give the guy some credit for sticking to it. Like Fellowship of the Ring comes out in 2001. He's working on it for how many years prior to that, right? And then apart from this stint in 2005, 8, 9, 10, he's devoted to the Hobbit Tolkien stuff from 2000, like let's say 1998, 99 through, post 2015. That's a healthy part of an adult career to devote to making properties in a single universe. And I mean, it's hard not to think about that as a positive, a tick in the plus for him as a trademark director. Like the rest of the stuff it's fair to be periphery to all of that incredible work that he's done in Tolkien's Middle-earth.
Yeah. And, I do wonder, I don't know how much he is actually still involved with Weta. I know he kind of, started the whole thing and got it up and running, particularly for all of these. But I wonder how much he's still involved, because obviously we didn't really talk about, but like with the Hobbit films, he also was big on the development of that high frame rate. And certainly with Weta so heavily involved with James Cameron and all of the Avatar films and on the high frame rate there, it does make me wonder if part of what he is busy with is dealing with Weta and kind of helping kind of develop the world of effects. And I guess I shouldn't say he was one of the founders. It's Richard Taylor and Tanya Roger, the two founders of Weta. But I just feel like he is such an integral part of what they have been doing. I just wonder if he's involved much in any of that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's what I got, man.
Well, anyway, we will be right back. But first, our credits.
The Next Reel is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Tillman Celescu, Oriel Novella, and Eli Catlin. Andy usually finds all the stats for the awards and numbers at d-numbers.com, boxofficemojo.com, imdb.com, and wikipedia.org. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. Andy, there are a couple of awards, and I would like you to list them all, including nominations. You may begin.
Every single one. All right, there's only 123 wins with 127 other nominations, so it won't take too long.
Okay.
Yeah. No, at the Oscars, the film nominated for 13 awards, one of the highest films nominated as far as the number of Oscars. It won only 4. It won Best Cinematography for Andrew Lesnie, Best Makeup, Best Original Score, Best Visual Effects. All of those make sense. It lost to Best Picture, A Beautiful Mind. I can't see that anymore. I couldn't even see it then. Like, it's A Beautiful Mind. I was like, this shouldn't have even been nominated. Best Supporting Actor, Ian McKellen, but lost to Jim Broadbent in Iris. Jim Broadbent was really good in that film. That's a tough one. I feel like they were going to give one supporting actor or acting nomination to the film, and they gave it to Ian McKellen, which was great. I just am sad that he ended up losing it. But it's, Jim Broadbent was fine in Iris. I'm not too upset about that loss.
I don't remember Iris, but I'm sure it was great.
Yeah, it's a story about Alzheimer's. It's his younger self falls in love with and marries Kate Winslet, and then his older self is Jim Broadbent, married to Judi Dench, who has Alzheimer's, and it's very sad because we saw them when they were young.
Okay.
It's kind of like a British The Notebook.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
I get it.
Okay. Best Director, Peter Jackson was nominated, but lost to Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind. Likewise, Adapted Screenplay, Akiva Goldsman won for A Beautiful Mind. Art Direction, Set Decoration lost to Moulin Rouge. Costume Design lost to Moulin Rouge. Film Editing lost to Black Hawk Down. Best Original Song, May It Be by Enya, lost to Randy Newman, If I Didn't Have You from Monsters, Inc. And Best Sound, but lost to Black Hawk Down. Any of those, do you feel like I could see that one?
Okay. A Beautiful Mind
should not have won a single thing.
I should not have won a single thing. Now, should Peter Jackson have won Best Director?
Well, are you asking because you want to know who else was nominated? Because I'll tell you.
Oh, as long as you're offering, I'll take it.
Ron Howard, A Beautiful Mind, won. David Lynch, nominated for Mulholland Drive. Peter Jackson, of course, for this. Ridley Scott, Black Hawk Down. Robert Altman, Gosford Park.
I could see... it just feels like this should have been a Peter Jackson win to me. All of those. I could go maybe with Ridley Scott, but he would never get it.
I would go with David Lynch. Mulholland Drive would be probably my pick of the 5. You're crazy. You're a crazy person.
David Lynch, apparently I am. I'm an island.
You should be. You should be crazy. David Lynch, Mulholland Drive. I would absolutely have picked that. I mean, it was a tricky thing because what ended up happening with this film, and people will talk about this left and right as far as these awards, they knew the whole trilogy was getting made. And so a lot of these categories, when people saw the first film, I think they said, oh, it's really good. I'll probably save my vote for the third film. And again, Return of the King will win a lot of Oscars. And I think that people were just kind of building up their votes for that. And so they're like, well, I don't want them to win 3 years in a row, even though, The Godfather won several Best Picture, but it is what it is. Anyway, David Lynch would have been my pick.
I'm curious your take, though. I'm curious your take on the comparison, or particularly the parallels between art direction, set direction, and costume design, and losing to Moulin Rouge.
Those are those are the two that I'm most like, that's a tough call. That's a really tough call. Moulin Rouge was so fantastical. I kind of lean toward those. I don't know. It's a very tricky thing because they're also real world. I mean, granted, they're very fantastical Baz Luhrmann style real world. I guess I'm okay with them winning. And, I think it's probably fair to say that both of us probably would have dropped Ron Howard anyway from Best Director and put Baz Luhrmann in here.
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of want to just say Fellowship should have gotten those, but I'm okay. Of all of them, I'm most okay with Moulin Rouge having taken those two.
Here's the problem that I have is Jim Broadbent should have won every category for his portrayal in Moulin Rouge. Can. Like, he's so over the top. I can't believe they're even talking about this Iris nonsense. It's Broadbent in Moulin Rouge for everything, even costume design. Just give it to Jim Broadbent.
Yeah.
All right.
Film editing, I can see going to Black Hawk Down, but and sound, I guess just because it's Ridley Scott doing very intense things in a heavy war film.
Yeah.
Original song, I don't know. I mean, Randy Newman has won far too many Oscars for some fairly mediocre songs over his years. He certainly has good ones, don't get me wrong, but and I don't know if May It Be Enya is the one I would have picked of the two, but I feel like, well, I certainly would have picked it over Randy Newman's song. I guess we'll say that.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah. Otherwise, it was the song Until by Sting from Kate and Leopold, There You'll Be by Diane Warren from Pearl Harbor, and Vanilla Sky by Paul McCartney from that movie.
Vanilla Sky and Until are the two songs that made it into our rotation around here.
I don't know if I care about either of those songs, though, and that's, I guess, the thing. So
Kate and Leopold was weirdly cute. That was not terrible.
Yeah, no, the film itself, right? Anyway, so outside of the Oscars, I mean, there are a ton I'm skipping, obviously, but the Saturn Awards, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror, it had 9 nominations, didn't win any. No, it won 3, sorry. Won Best Fantasy Film, Best Director, and Best Supporting Actor, Ian McKellen. It was nominated, Orlando Bloom was nominated for the Cinescape Genre Face of the Future Award, but lost to James Marsters in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't know who that is. You can tell me.
It's Pike.
I've never watched that show. You know this.
Andy.
I know. Best Writing lost to AI, Artificial Intelligence. Best Music lost to John Williams for his score for AI, Artificial Intelligence. Best Special Effects, AI, Artificial Intelligence. Best Costume lost to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And Best Makeup lost to Hannibal. I don't know what the Saturn Awards were thinking. So many of these, I'm like, well, really? Strange choices. Yeah,
I can absolutely relate, particularly in the fact that this Orlando Bloom lost to Buffy.
Well,
how is that even in the running Face of the Future?
That particular award it's across mediums, so it's just who is the face of this future, and they do one for men and one for women, and Bloom and Marsters were 2 of the people nominated. I guess the fact that neither of them currently have robust careers perhaps speaks to that a little bit, maybe.
I don't know what you're talking about. Marsters went on to Dragon Ball Evolution, which is a 2.5 on the IMDb scale. And don't forget, he does have a 7.0 P.S. I Love You, 2007.
The other nominees, Luke Goss from Blade 2, Michael Rosenbaum from Smallville, and Hayden Christensen from Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. James Marsters is the one who won.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. Smallville should have taken it.
Last but not least, and this was, I just thought funny, in 2004, the good old Guinness Book of World Records awarded this trilogy for the largest battle sequences on film for the entire trilogy. With this to say, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy featured battle scenes with over 200,000 fighting characters. To achieve this, Weta Digital wrote bespoke crowd simulation software called Massive, which combined digital animation with an artificial intelligence that governed how the characters interacted.
And there it was, our future foretold. Massive is the AI that's going to take over humanity. Sorry about everything. Love,
sorry.
Peter.
That's right.
All right. How to do at the box office.
Well, Jackson's massive project started with this film and a budget of $93 million. That's $158.1 million in today's dollars. The movie opened December 19th, 2001, opposite Vanilla Sky, Not Another Teen Movie, and the limited release of The Royal Tenenbaums. Interestingly, it was Vanilla Sky that took the #1 spot that weekend, with this landing in 3rd place behind Ocean's 11 in its 2nd week. This, however, did take over the number one spot in its second week, which it did hold for 3 weeks after that. It stayed in the top 10 for 8 weeks and it ended up having its theatrical run for 36 weeks. The movie went on to earn $316.1 million domestically and $582 million internationally for a total gross of $1.5 billion in today's dollars. That lands the film with an adjusted profit per finished minute of $7.6 million and proved that when a massive three-part story was done right, it could be a great success.
Andy, your APFM, is that calculated on the theatrical release runtime?
Theatrical release runtime.
What is that? Did you do the calculation for?
No, because it wasn't something that really affected the budget. It did have it played for a weekend in an extended edition, but the extended edition largely was never going to contribute to its what it was making at the box office.
Gross, yeah. All right. Fascinating. Well, I'm glad we're doing this series because I love this movie, even if we're not going into the, what would ultimately take this show 20 hours to talk about if we were to go into all those details. This is still an epic episode of this podcast.
Absolutely.
This might be the longest that we've done.
I feel like we've done some very long episodes. Anyway, we'll be right back for our ratings, but first, here's the trailer for next week's movie, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
The fate of the world will soon be decided. The dominion of evil grows even stronger. There is a union now between the two towers. Barad-dûr, fortress of the Dark Lord Sauron, and Orthanc, stronghold of the wizard Saruman. The peril of the Ringbearer deepens. An unseen danger draws closer. For there is another who hunts the ring.
They stole my precious, and we want it.
Come back to you now, at the turn of the tide.
Andy, you've heard of Letterboxd. I know you have, because you're there all the time. It's the greatest social media network for movie lovers. It's just for movie lovers, really. You can go over there. You can add your reviews of films that you love, or you can just keep a film diary. Remind yourself over the years when you watched movies and what you thought of them. Give them a star rating and a heart. And there is a paid tier. If you like the free tier that you're on when you just sign up, you can upgrade with a few bucks, and that'll get rid of the ads for you, and it will help support the fantastic Kiwi team that makes this network. And you can do that at thenextreel.com/letterboxd. You can get 20% off, and it does count for renewals as well. Andy, what are you going to do for this movie? 3 stars with quibbles?
For 3 stars with quibbles. No, I mean, it's just, from the moment that the film came out, I've just loved it. It's an incredible world that Jackson created. So this is easily and always will be 5 stars and a heart.
Me too. 5 stars and a heart all the way.
That's, So don't forget to visit thenextreel.com/letterbox to get your pro or patron membership. It works for renewals as well. So what did you think about The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring? We would love to hear your thoughts. Hop into the Show Talk channel in our Discord community where we will be talking about the movie this week.
When the movie ends,
our conversation begins.
Letterboxd giveth, Andy.
As Letterboxd always doeth.
So I've got one that's a little serious.
Ooh.
It's not a joke, a jape, a jibe. Is yours a joke, a jape, or a jibe?
I suppose you'd call it that, although it's more just it's an opinion. Why don't you go first?
This is from Silent Dawn. It's 5-star, or a 96 out of 100 is what's posted here. 96 out of 100. That is a finite scale. You think I have trouble with half stars. 96 out of 100. Magical, astounding filmmaking. This could have turned out terribly, oh so terribly, but it didn't. It sure didn't. It's a near-perfect cinematic experience and adaptation, delicately told right from the opening exposition dump that haunts the very marrow of my bones. A world with so much beauty soon becomes tarnished by darkness. It only becomes clear around the 45-minute mark why Jackson was chosen for this project. His craft is sweeping and relentlessly classical. Only a splatter and adventure geek could evoke such crumbling destruction and still sell every mythical, at times overwrought, line of dialogue. He believes in it. The world was real to Tolkien. It was real to Jackson. And it's real to the audience. I like that last bit a lot. The part of the reason this works is just because of how much the people who made the thing believe in this world as a real entity.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great one. And in a strange pivot, I'm going to jump to mine, which is a half star by Christine One, who I'm not exactly sure why, but considering that Christine One is writing a review that ties into a different franchise that we've talked about earlier in the season. And I just don't know why this was the direction that Christine One took, but I just find it funny that this is what Christine One wrote as a review.
Am I going to know when you say it? Like, am I going to know?
You're going to instantly know what it is. Okay. Christine One's half-star review, Aka Awful.
What? What?
Of course, referencing the a cappella trilogy Pitch Perfect that we talked about earlier in the season. Aka Awful.
God. That's crazy.
What? Where's the connection between Pitch Perfect and the a cappella college students and this? I don't know, but Christine One felt that was the review to leave. Somehow.
Do you know what? I want to check Christine One's review of Pitch Perfect. I'll bet it's something like, "Acapella is wonderful, my precious."
Christine One has only reviewed the one film, from what I can tell.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is the one.
This is the one. Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Letterboxd.
All right.
It is hard to believe we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
Oh, you're telling me. Producing this show week after week is so much fun, but it does require a ton of work behind the scenes. If you'd like to help support our efforts, one easy way is by using our Originals page when shopping for books and movies that we've covered.
Your purchases made through our links give us a small commission at no extra cost to you, and allow us to keep having these great discussions.
The Originals page at thenextreel.com/originals links to the source material from all of our adapted film discussions. Purchasing through our links support the show at no extra cost to you.
In Season 12, the focus was big franchises and series. We covered both Paddington films, adapted from the beloved children's book character created by Michael Bond.
Oh, I love those films so much.
Hugh Grant is perfect.
For our Pitch Perfect series, the first film was adapted from Mickey Rapkin's nonfiction book about collegiate a cappella competitions.
It's like a short story of my life, literally. I lived college a cappella.
Sing it, brother.
I lived college a cappella.
I didn't mean literally.
You know who you're talking to, right? The Twilight Saga dominated the season with 5 films adapted from Stephenie Meyer's vampire romance novels, Twilight, New Moon, Eclipse, and the 2 Breaking Dawn parts.
Dominated with awkward romance and nonsense logic is more like it.
That too.
Another Thin Man brought us back to Dashiell Hammett's only Thin Man sequel based on other Hammett material, The Farewell Murder, that wasn't just based on the characters from the first film.
We talked about Trainspotting and its sequel, T2 Trainspotting, adapted from Irvine Welsh's novels.
I hate the sequel's name.
I do too.
And the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy adapted from J.R.R. Tolkien's epic fantasy series.
Love these.
Extended editions all the way, baby.
Plus, all the Mission Impossible films based on the 1960s TV series.
And we've still got at least one more to go.
Members got to hear us chat about The Hustler and The Color of Money, adapted from Walter Tevis's books.
Get all of these books and more at our originals page, thenextreel.com/originals.
Start your next read from the movies we've covered at thenextreel.com/originals.